Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Module 4 of the ETEP online training series, and we're just going to dive in. So this is the same disclaimer you've seen in all the other sessions, and just a reminder of kind of what we're talking about here. The ETEP, really the focus is on helping you develop a simplified and adaptable strategic planning and management system if you utilize the approach that I've been sharing throughout this course. And then just a reminder of the nomenclature that when I say, if you hear ETEP component 1, it means the same thing as a tribal environmental plan or a TEP, or I most commonly say ETEP strategic work plan. Those all are the same thing. And then just a reminder of where we've been and where we're going. So in Module 1, we focused on the ETEP requirements, components, and processes, primarily according to the EPA GAP guidance. I walked through beginning the scoping and information gathering processes, and then in Module 2, we did start beginning to identify and select the priority program areas and dove into the process of gathering information and reviewing them, otherwise known as the baseline needs assessments. And through that process, started to identify and select goals and objectives. And I did some walkthrough on that with you. In Module 3, we continued, kind of revisited the baseline needs assessments, the information gathering review processes, and then started to take that information that we had gathered and reviewed and entered it into a living adaptable ETEP strategic work plan. I showed you the framework of what that actually looks like and entered some information. Today's session, which is only going to be 60 minutes as opposed to the 90-minute regular sessions, webinars, is going to include a question and answer session. I'm also going to cover strategies for managing and organizing objectives, and to the extent that we have time, I will continue to walk through the process of preparing your ETEP strategic work plan. The next module, we're going to cover developing an overarching strategic plan, which is going to cover the mission, vision, values, goals, and objectives, and doing a SWOT analysis. Module 6 is going to be about preparing and finalizing your complete ETEP and strategic plan, covering some areas that are required by the EPA GAP guidance that we have not covered yet, including the inventory of regulated entities, the EPA's priorities, roles, and responsibilities, and getting tribal leadership and EPA review and approval. In Module 7, we're going to cover utilizing, reviewing, and updating your ETEP and strategic plan. Some of that we'll actually cover a little bit today, but how do you make decision-making processes, how you'll manage staff, time, and objectives, preparing your GAP and other grant work plans, and your annual review. And then Module 8 will include another question and answer session and probably include some other elements of this training that I don't feel like we have covered in sufficient or that could use a little more depth with time permitting. Okay, so the detailed agenda for today, I will briefly do a GoToWebinar orientation and course logistics. I just want to make sure that you're familiar with your dashboard and so that you can ask questions. I'm going to briefly review the Component 1, ETEP Component 1 requirements, and then I'm going to walk through very quickly the steps we've gone through so far in developing an ETEP. And then going through ETEP, the Component 1 requirements and the steps, I'm going to do a question and answer session. I just want to review those first. So as I highlight each of those, I ask that you note any questions you have and enter those, or raise your hand and you can ask those. And then, assuming that there aren't an overwhelming amount of questions, I'm going to cover strategies for adding, organizing, and managing objectives within your ETEP strategic work plan. And this will cover some common, repeat, and also objectives that you'll be cycling year in, year out. And then I'll continue the process of developing your ETEP, so doing the research and incorporating information into the document. And then lastly, just a reminder of the assignments and the next steps. And I also do ask that at the end of the webinar, it'll bring you to a post-webinar evaluation, and your feedback is helpful. I've been receiving that throughout, and I really appreciate you taking the few minutes it takes to just let me know how are things going, what's working well, what's not, and then also adding any questions that you may have that were not covered. Okay, so I appreciate everybody's done a good job of responding to the doodle polls for scheduling the webinar modules. I hope all of you have attempted to access the resources and the videos. So the videos are available on Vimeo, and the resources are available on the Google Drive link. Actually, I'm going to pull up the Vimeo real quick, just so you can see. And then you just go on here. Actually, you'll have the link available to you. Let me grab that link. One moment. So the password for all of the videos is the same. So I'm actually going, I'm going from a browser I had that's not actually logged in. So in this case, I have entered the link for the Module 3 video, and I'm going to enter the password, which is Prosper ETEP 16, and that's that's case sensitive, so it's a capital P. The rest of Prosper is lowercase, and then ETEP is all capitalized, and then 16. And you click access, and it'll pull up the video. I must have entered. Okay, so it showed up. All right, I'm gonna get started now. Okay, so if you have any problems accessing that, let me know. And then also too, I included the link for the resources on Google Drive. So if you plug that link in, this should show up, and then you can go and you can pull up the presentations. You go back here and you can see all the resources as well, and including the ETEP catalog. So this will show up initially as just like a screen, kind of like this. So you do have the ability to cut and paste. You don't have the ability to filter and sort, so you may want to download it into an Excel file, and you can do that. Let's see. So if you add it to your drive, then you can download it. So you click here to add it to your drive, and then you would have the ability to download it, or you should have the ability to download it. If for some reason that doesn't work, let me know. I'm going to test that out afterwards just to make sure that you do have the ability to download it and sort it and filter, get to the information you need as quickly as possible. So that just wanted to show you, give you a little demonstration of how to access those resources. And then you've been getting the ongoing or the daily emails with the assignments and the reminders. All right, and just to do a brief kind of, I know I've done this a few times, but I want to do it again, an orientation, just so you know. All right, so let's get this guy out of the way. Oops, sorry about that. Oh, my photo program doesn't seem to want to open. I just got a new computer, so apologize about that. All right, so you have your start screen. Let's see, let's go to full screen. All right, so your start screen's like this. Then you have the sample webinar. Let's see your microphone right here. You can hide the panel. Let's go to the next. Can hide it. So actually, the main thing I just want to show you is the ability to ask questions. So right here, you have a chat box that pops up, and you can enter questions in here. You can also raise your hand. So there's a little Let me zoom in a little bit. There's a little icon right there. So if you raise your hand, I'll know that you want to speak. Otherwise, you can enter questions into the box, and then those will pop up, and I'll be notified about that. So we're getting to the question and answer session in a moment. But if you have any, either raise your hand or enter the questions in there. Okay. And here is just a brief reminder and overview of the 4 required components for an ETEP. And so far, we've just been focusing on component number 1, which is the identification of tribal environmental program priorities, including capacity building and program implementation goals, which is really 95% of the work in developing an ETEP. We're going to cover the other ones in session 6 shortly, and so you'll kind of understand what each of these are and how to meet these requirements and incorporate them into your final ETEP. Okay, so here's also just a brief review of the tribal program. So a brief review of what elements are required for component number 1, and that's the short description of your priority, your program goals, your intermediate program development milestones and objectives, the tribe's plans to manage authorized environmental programs, and then the needed assistance to achieve goals and milestone and objectives. So that's just we've been covering that throughout the course. I've been showing you how to approach that, how to incorporate that all into your ETEP. And then really through the process that I've been sharing of walking through. So first initially is the scoping process. So determining the initial scope of your ETEP and strategic plan, including what departments you're going to include, what staff members you're going to include in this process, what stakeholders do you want to have involved in the planning process, who do you want to gain information from. And when you kind of develop that initial scope, then you do want to select that core development team. So identify stakeholders as well. So kind of overlap 1 and 2. Number 3 is an important step where you gather all the information you need that's going to be relevant to developing your ETEP. So your information gathering review is really conducting an informal baseline needs assessment. You could conduct a formal baseline needs assessment, prepare a full report, but it's not absolutely necessary in order to prepare your ETEP. And you've already identified hopefully your priority program areas, and then you want to select those. So what are the programs you're going to cover? Things like air resources, water resources, waste management. You also want to have education outreach, and you want to have a general section, a general program area that includes financial and administrative objectives and goals. You'll also want to be identifying and selecting your long-term goals. So those goals that are going to go beyond just the 4 to 5 year scope of the ETEP strategic work plan itself. And these can be goals that you're going to continue to pursue for years, decades to come. It may never actually be achievable, such as eliminating water pollution. That's not necessarily an achievable goal, depending on how you define water pollution. But it still is a good goal to continue to pursue to guide your objectives. And then identifying and selecting your intermediate objectives and milestones. So if you have the goal of eliminating water pollution, then what are going to be the specific objectives you're going to pursue? And those may be related to different aspects of water pollution issues, such as stormwater runoff from construction sites. So you may have a series of objectives that involve developing policies and procedures and implementing those policies and procedures for enforcing that upon people who are doing construction projects. Step number 7 was preparing the ETEP strategic work plan framework, and that's when I showed you the spreadsheet and then the Word version document where it provides a container to put your priority program areas with a brief description of each area, the long-term goals, and the objectives into those documents, and you'll see more of that in a moment. But really, and then identifying what additional information. So making sure you have the minimum information that's required by the EPA, and then providing the additional information or incorporating additional information that you may want to use from the perspective of just managing your program and having information such as funding, staffing, and other information at your fingertips so that you can best manage your programs. And then going from there and beginning after you've done all that research, done the information gathering, and selected your priority program areas, goals, and objectives, inserting that information into that framework that you have developed. Okay, so are there any questions on the components that are required, at least under the component number 1? So at this time, as I mentioned, uh, if you want to, I can unmute you if you want to ask those questions verbally or enter those into the chat box. And if there are no questions, that's fine. But I just definitely want to provide the opportunity to ask questions if there's anything that's come up. Also, do you have any questions about the process that I've gone through as well, and anything else related to developing your ETEP? As I mentioned, we're going to get into the last 3 components in the future modules, but just so far what's been covered, I just want to make sure that there are no questions, and if there are, to be able to answer any of those. And just as a reminder that you can answer those at any time. I'm sorry, you can ask those at any time. You can email them to me, and I will address those at any time. But I just wanted to provide this opportunity for question and answer session. I do have other content to cover as well. I did anticipate there possibly not being any questions. Teresa, I saw that you came on a little bit later. I had done a little demonstration about how to log into the videos. I know you've been having a little trouble doing that. So it's on the video that you'll receive afterwards, and I do share what the password is in there as well. But I can work with you one-on-one. I want to make sure that you have access to that. Okay, so I received Teresa's response about that, and I didn't receive any other questions, so I'm going to move on to strategies for incorporating objectives into your ETEP strategic work plan. Okay, so I encourage you when you're developing your ETEP strategic work plan to include an objective for every major activity that you are doing that's performed a minimum, well, by the environmental department, the environmental office, and definitely the programs that are covered. But you may also include non-EPA or non-environmental activities. It really depends on the scope of your ETEP. I think at minimum your ETEP is going to cover just make sure that that's back there. Your ETEP is going to at minimum cover what programs are administered by the environmental department, but there may be EPA related activities that are covered by other departments that are outside of the scope of yours. And if your department does non-EPA or non-environmental related things, I think I encourage you to incorporate those as well, because really as a strategic planning and management tool, you want to see everything you have going on. So your major activities are going to be the things you're doing year in and year out. They're going to be programmatic specific stuff related to implementing air quality, water quality, waste management, education outreach programs. But major activities also include administrative and financial responsibilities and tasks as well. And you'll see some examples of those in a moment. So that just reiterates the point. You want to include any and all administrative and financial activities, because there's a significant amount of work that goes into doing those activities as well. And this allows you to account for all the resource requirements you're going to need to accomplish those activities. So all the time, all the funding, all the staffing that you're going to need to accomplish each of those activities. I also recommend including possible objectives. And by possible, I mean, so let's actually open up an example so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. So in the ETEP strategic work plan, on the left side right here, you'll see the year. So there's a year, and if you do this drop down right here, and hopefully you can see that okay, it has the years 2016, 17, 18, 19, and possible. So if, as you're developing your plan, you want to, and as you come up with objectives, if you want to pursue them within the next 4 to 5 years or 4 years, then you want to assign whatever year that you plan on accomplishing that objective. But there may be ideas that come up that you're not really sure whether and how they fit. And in that case, you want to actually indicate that those are possible activities. And what this does is it helps keep it on your radar so that when you're reviewing this on a regular basis, um, you will see this and you'll decide, okay, well, at this time, we developed this in 2016, and then when you're reviewing it at the end of 2016 or early 2017, you review the possible objectives, and you can decide at that point whether you want to incorporate those into the plan. So if you had as a possible objective develop a greenhouse gas emissions tracking system and database, then at that point you can decide, is this something we want to pursue right now? Do we know for sure we're going to pursue it? And are we going to pursue it in the next 4 years? And if you decide, yes, we're going to try to pursue this in 2018, then you can add 2018 there and update it, and now it's incorporated into your plan. This is helpful, I think, in also allowing staff members to come up with ideas to make sure that they're being considered on a regular basis in an objective manner. So your air quality specialist may have had this idea, and instead of like bringing it up at a random meeting and possibly having it be forgotten, your air quality specialist knows that this is in the plan and it will be regularly evaluated, so they don't have to keep bringing it up or be afraid that it's going to get lost in the shuffle if they don't if they don't continually try to be the squeaky wheel. So I mentioned, for ideas and also for future objectives. So if it's outside the scope of the 4 to 5 year plan, then you can keep it on your radar. Let's say that you know that you want to pursue developing greenhouse gas emissions in 2020, but your plan only runs for 2016, 2019. Then you have it there as a placeholder so that when your plan then does get changed to cover 2017, 2020, you can then change that from a possible activity to an activity to be conducted in 2020. And as I mentioned, then you can review these annually and add them to the plan if and when appropriate. And you'll just add those by replacing the possible with the specific year. You also want to repeat an objective for every year in which it occurs. So coming back to this example, and I'll be showing you more of this. So let's go back here. Let's just undo this, unfilter these. And so let's go to a consistent category like reporting. So in this case, a couple different filters on. Let's take those filters off. Let's take the Okay, so this is just a sample plan right here, and I'm going to show you an example of how to do this later on, but you're going to have to do reporting every single year for every program area. And so I would actually say that right now it's only shown for 1 year. I would actually have this activity be repeated for all years of your plan. Oops, did not mean to paste that row. Let's undo that. Okay, so, just as an example, let me do that. So in this case, so I'm just going to put 2017, 2018, 2019. So this is the reporting activity under your climate change program. So you're going to be doing that every single year. So you can just copy and paste all this information right here and include it each time. So now you have all of your reporting for your climate change program covered. And you would do that for all program areas because all program areas are going to have a certain amount of reporting. If it's not grant funded, you may not have grant drawdown requests be part of this as well. It may not have financial reports, but you're probably going to do some form of reporting, if not to an agency, then to the tribe. Okay. Also, you may have a multi-year project, such as a habitat restoration project. So you may be removing an invasive plant species from a particular area, such as a rundo, and that project itself is not going to be done in 1 year, maybe a 3-year project. Uh, so you would actually repeat that for each year. You can copy and paste it. You could actually, I would say, phase one, phase two, phase three for each year. You kind of want to distinguish that you're making progress with it as well. And as I mentioned, kind of those ongoing activities. So you have other activities in addition to reporting. You may have air quality monitoring or water quality monitoring that you want to repeat on a regular basis. So, I mean, you're just going to be copying and pasting the same activity unless for some reason that activity is changing. So an example of an activity that may be changing is you may have, let's do air quality monitoring for ozone and PM 2.5. Um, and let's say you want to, let's say you revise your QAP and get approval to do air monitoring for PM 10, or let's say you have some heavy metals that are incorporated into that as well. So then you could just change the activity to include the new parameters that you're going to be monitoring for as well in those future years. And then you want to review and reorganize your objectives as needed, especially initially. So as you flesh out your plan and as your first draft of it, you want to review them and reorganize them to make sure you're not overwhelming yourself. I'm talk more about this in a moment. But this will involve entering, reviewing, and adjusting your staffing as well. So I'll provide an example of that a little later on. All right, so I want to share some strategies for some common ongoing / recurring activities. One area in particular that's important to be aware of and to be careful about is your education outreach activities. And the reason is with the new GAP guidance, so I mean the EPA GAP grant itself is only supposed to fund capacity building activities unless it's covering some, except for waste management, which does allow for some implementation activities. This is problematic for most tribes because the bread and butter of most tribal environmental programs is ongoing education and outreach. So it's doing your annual cleanups and environmental fairs. It's preparing and publications on an ongoing basis, preparing articles for the tribal newsletter. It's mailing out flyers on key issues that are affecting the community, posting things to the website, posting things to Facebook. So these are things that you have to do on a regular basis, and you may not have funding to do otherwise. So it's challenging because the EPA used to permit this, even though technically it was not supposed to be allowed under the GAP program. But with the new GAP guidance, they're trying to really phase that out because it's really not an eligible activity under the GAP program. So for your GAP funding, you must describe, so there's a workaround for this, and I'm going to share that with you right now, but for your GAP funding, at least for your GAP funding itself, it doesn't apply to other funding sources. So for your Clean Water Act 106 and 319 and your Clean Air Act 103 or 105 programs, you don't necessarily need to do only capacity building related education outreach activities. You can actually do those activities on an ongoing basis, doing your newsletters, your events each year, even if they're the same exact thing, that may be allowable under those programs, but it's not under the GAP program. So the EPA does acknowledge that developing, establishing, and maintaining your environmental protection program capacity is a continuing programmatic need. So the workaround that I'm going to share with you is something is consistent with what the GAP guidance says. So this is a quote from the GAP guidance, meaning that you can do repetitive activities, you just have to space them out in a strategic manner. And so just to, as I mentioned, the concern is that you probably have mainly GAP funds for your program, and those GAP funds are limited to capacity building. And a concern maybe is that if your capacity is built, which is technically the purpose of an ETEP and of your GAP program, you may lose funding. But the EPA does acknowledge that capacity building is a continuing programmatic need. So just because you've built capacity in a particular area doesn't mean you're going to lose funding. Eventually, you're going to have to, capacity is not a static thing. You're the, the circumstances, the needs of your department, of your program, regulatory issues, environmental issues, those things evolve over time. So you need to have the ability to develop the capacity to meet those changing circumstances. So this is what I've kind of mentioned before, but just to kind of quote the GAP guidance, just to reassure you, developing, establishing, and maintaining environmental program capacities is an ongoing effort requiring capacities to evolve as the tribal environmental program itself expands and undertakes additional challenges. So, partially here, you have a program that's expanding. You may be taking on additional challenges. Um, but also circumstances may be changing. The EPA also, so another quote, the EPA also recognizes that GAP resources provide a significant foundation for maintaining tribal environmental program capacities over time. So the EPA understands and recognizes that your GAP program, your GAP funding is a foundational funding source for maintaining your environmental program capacities over time. So the EPA is not looking to defund you. They're not looking to get you to a certain point and then take away your funding. They understand that you need this funding on an ongoing basis. So the EPA recognizes this constraint and is actually trying to work with tribes to make sure. So another quote, the tribes that have successfully developed capacity in a given area can continue to receive GAP funding to expand, enhance, or evolve their capacity. So, if you've focused on open burning, you developed education outreach related to open burning, you've released that all. In the future, you're going to want to enhance and evolve that capacity. So let's say that education outreach focused just on, it was just newsletters, newsletter articles, but you didn't develop new materials that could be handed out at events. That's an area that you want to expand your capacity in. Um, in you may identify some new aspects or new population segments that you can reach, or a better way to reach somebody on this, and that may involve enhancing that particular outreach strategy or activity. And let's say 4 or 5 years down the road, the understanding of what the impacts of open burning are on human health and the environment has changed. There's new scientific studies, there's new evidence. Well, you need to evolve that capacity to reflect the new understanding that's available out there. So you need to update the existing resources you have that are providing education outreach on open burning. You need to change those, update those so that they reflect the most current science that's out there. And then the last quote here, GAP guidance establishes ETEPs to document the tribe's program development goals. Tribes should reevaluate their program capacity and development goals on a regular basis to ensure that their systems, procedures, and policies are still appropriate to determine if additional capacities are needed. So by virtue of having ETEP, you are continuously reevaluating your program capacity, identifying where if you did have existing activities and efforts, those may not be sufficient to meet the needs that have changed, the circumstances that have changed, or the science that have changed. Or there may be new capacities that are needed out there. And then the GAP guidance does provide some examples of evolving capacity. So one example is a tribe with a community education program may continue to receive GAP funds to expand the program by adding new features such as outreach strategies for vulnerable groups. For example, children, the elderly, people in poor health, and expectant mothers, or for identifying new media outlets to reach target audiences, such as, let's say you're just doing newsletters or mailings. You may want to consider the internet, you may want to consider Twitter, you may want to consider events, workshops, so on and so forth. Another example, a tribe with basic water program capacity may continue to receive GAP funds to expand their water program by adding new baseline data to their existing program, developing additional laboratory analysis quality assurance plans, or adding capacity to share additional water quality data across multiple platforms. So in this case, you may be just doing very basic sampling for bacteria, and let's say a few, maybe turbidity and temperature, but you want to expand that to incorporate heavy metals. So you may need to update your QAP, you may need to identify a new lab, you may have internal capabilities that you can expand upon. So GAP is possibly eligible to fund those things as well. You also could look to your Clean Water Act 106, and you don't necessarily need to meet those specific capacity building requirements under 106 or 319, but this is just another example of kind of evolving capacity and how to make sure that you continue to get gap funding for important activities. All right, so just kind of fleshing out this education outreach, I'm going to cover a couple of different categories of activities. So under education outreach, this under GAP, the same activity focused on the same topic that is being delivered through the same channel cannot be repeated year in and year out. And if you've not heard this from your project officer, you likely will eventually. So my advice is do not repeat a specific topic within a 4 to 5 year period. So one approach is to rotate and repeat topics. And so by rotating and repeating topics, you're demonstrating capacity that's evolving over time. The one drawback with this is that you need to, specify what topic is going to be incorporated into your ETEP strategic work plan, and you can't just copy and paste the objective. So you must change that topic each year, and then that topic must align with the objectives for the same year. So it takes a little more work to specify the topic, and you may have multiple, if you have multiple topics, it may ultimately just be a little more complicated, may require a little more work. If you are going to do this, then you can use the same topic for your education outreach, your training and collaboration potentially in the same year if you want to specify a topic you're going to be focusing on that year. And then what you would do is just repeat the same topic after a 4 to 5 year period. So in that case, there's going to be a justifiable need to update this capacity after that much time. So after 4 to 5 years, going back to the open burning example, your materials, the activities, everything you've done focused on open burning, that's outdated. It's stale. It needs to be updated. It needs to be redelivered. It needs to be updated. It needs to be revised. So here's an example of under waste management, and this is like how to rotate capacity building. Just a quick note: waste management is not necessarily, you don't necessarily need to rotate waste management, possibly like you do the other areas, because waste management implementation can be eligible under GAP, but that's still the language, the example still kind of is the same for other areas. So let's say your GAP is being used to do air quality related stuff. Well, that's where you definitely need to rotate it. So in 2016, you're going to focus on developing and testing. So the key here is kind of using language that's capacity building language. So you're developing and testing education outreach materials, activities, so on and so forth, focused on composting. In 2017, you're going to do the same type of thing using the same channels that's focused on illegal dumping. So in 2016, you did your newsletters, you brought these, you developed materials that you distributed at your environmental fair. You posted stuff on your website. You did some social media related stuff. In 2017, you're doing using the same exact channels. You're just shifting the focus from composting to illegal dumping. And if you're at the event and you're distributing your illegal dumping materials that you developed in 2017, the EPA is not going to be right there and saying, if you happen to also pull out your composting related stuff and have that available for people as well, which doesn't take any effort at all, the EPA is not going to say, oh, well, you can't distribute that at that event because that's not capacity building. It's so minuscule that they're not going to care about that. So you still can do the ongoing education outreach on composting, but your focus in that particular year is on illegal dumping. So in 2018, your focus then could shift to source reduction. So same thing, same channels of communication. And then 2019 would focus on recycling. And then if you have a 5-year plan, let's say in 2020, it could focus on household hazardous waste. Okay, so after 5 years, if you have a 5-year plan, these things are outdated and they need to be they're outdated and they need to be updated. So you cycle these exact same topics back through. So in 2021, you're then doing, you're revisiting all of your composting materials and activities, and you're updating and redelivering those. You're testing those out as well. So, it says test here, so that you can test it, you can evaluate it and see how effective it is and make any revisions. Um, and, really testing is the same thing as actually, in a sense, it's similar to implementing. So you need to kind of do test implementation, and you're delivering what you were already trying to deliver anyway. So this is, and then in 2022, you redo illegal dumping, you revisit that. 2023, you revisit source reduction. So you keep these things in mind as you're updating your plan on an annual basis, and you cycle these things back through. I think it's sufficient to wait just 4 years after 4 years. So you don't have to wait until after 5 years to revisit these things as well. All right, so as I mentioned, education outreach, you can't repeat the same topic each year, and at least under GAP. Under GAP objectives subject to the capacity building requirements, and that the waste management education outreach may not be subject to this. Education outreach under other grants may not be subject to that, so you can repeat the same thing, even the same topics year in and year out. So that's kind of one approach, would be to, when you're incorporating these into your ETEP strategic work plan, is that you would just change the topic in the objective for that year each year. Another approach is to generalize. And this is what I tend to do, is I'll have, this is some sample language: develop, test, evaluate, and deliver education outreach, literature, materials, and activities on, insert program areas. So air resources, issues, and opportunities. So instead of saying a specific one, you're covering an entire program area. Opportunities related to annual objectives. And then I have see a combined annual plan, and I'll share more of what that is in a moment. So in this case, you're referring to annual objectives rather than specific topics, and then you'll have a separate combined annual education outreach plan where you can focus on specific topics if you choose to. So that's an option of how to do that as well. And then you could update your annual funding plan, or not your annual funding plan. This is supposed to be annual education plan, education outreach plan, throughout the year, and that plan can be submitted to the EPA as a deliverable. So another example of a common ongoing recurring activity where you may want to take a similar approach is training. So participate, another example of an objective you can just copy and paste into your ETEP strategic work plan, is participate in trainings to obtain knowledge and skills, build capacities, and share experiences on the protection and management of insert program areas, so air resources. And then you can have a separate combined annual training plan. The training itself may relate to the current year's objectives, or that particular year's objectives, or future objectives. So just because, in some cases you may be going to training for future objectives or for areas you just don't understand, because you want to determine whether they are something that the tribe needs to give attention to. And then you do the option of preparing a combined annual training plan for each year, which can be updated throughout the year. If you don't want to prepare the training plan, then at that point you may want to or need to specify different topics for each year. And then that plan, if you do develop a plan, an annual training plan, it can be submitted to the EPA. Another area, common ongoing recurring area or activity is collaboration. And here an example is participate in local/state/federal forums to obtain information and pursue partnerships on air resources, issues, and opportunities that relate to annual objectives. So same thing, you'd repeat that year in and year out for your air resources and then for the other program areas as well. And I'm going to show you this in practice in a few moments. Another one is identifying, pursuing, and securing funding. Probably one of the most important things that you need to be doing on an annual basis. unless you are 100% tribally funded. So example language here is identify, pursue, and secure funding for, in this case, I put 2017 ETEP blank, insert the area, program area objectives, and then C combined annual funding plan. So I left the 2017 in here. So in this case, you want to identify, pursue, and secure funding for the following year. So this is an example of a 2016 objective. So in 2016, you want to be identifying, pursuing, and securing funding for your proposed 2017 objectives. Oops, I accidentally paused the recording for a moment. Just like in 2000 and just like this year, in 2016 you prepared your gap work plan for fiscal year 2017 and 18. You want to be doing that for every program area. So you must look ahead. So you want to go to your ETEP. You want to, when you're considering your funding, what funding you want to pursue, you want to filter for your 2017 objectives, and then develop your funding plan accordingly. And so I recommend preparing a combined annual funding plan every year for the following year. This is not something you include in your ETEP. This is just something you include as an ETEP objective if you want. And it just helps you kind of understand what funding you're going to be pursuing for the upcoming year. And that plan can be submitted to the EPA as a deliverable. If you don't want to prepare a plan, you may need to specify the different topics that you're going to pursue funding for in each year. Another common ongoing/recurring activity is progress in financial reporting and financial management, such as doing your drawdowns. And I already showed you an example of inserting and repeating this for every program year. And so here's some sample language. Prepare and submit progress reports, financial reports, end of year report, and grant drawdown requests for efforts and activities under the blank program area. So your air resources. So you'd have this listed for 2016 for your air resources. You'd also have it listed for 2016 on your water resources. For each program area, you'd want to have this listed because those take different resources, different personnel. They may be under different grants, so on and so forth. Another important recurring activity is doing your annual review and update of your ETEP strategic work plan. So an example of that language is annually review and update the ETEP insert program area, priority program area goals and objectives, attaining input from relevant departments, tribal council, and other stakeholders. You want to add this separately for each program area and for each year. So you'd have this for your water program listed for each year. So 2017, 2016, 17, 18, and 19. Under your water program, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Your education outreach, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Even your general category, because you want to review that separately. So you want to have a placeholder because reviewing and updating each ETEP program area takes time and resources. So you want to have an objective so that you can make sure you allocate sufficient time and resources to accomplishing that. An annual ETEP review is a gap guidance requirement, but it's something that's important to do anyways in order to maximize the value of your ETEP, especially as a strategic planning and management tool. So this is something you're going to be wanting to do anyways. And then you don't want to wait for EPA feedback. So it does say in the gap guidance that the EPA is supposed to review this with the tribe each year. But as you likely understand, the EPA has a lot on their plate. They're working with a lot of different tribes. They're a large bureaucracy. Getting feedback from them in a timely manner can be challenging at times, which also may depend on your project officer as well. I think some are faster, some may be slower. So don't necessarily wait for their feedback to update it. Update it yourself, focusing on the tribal objectives. Submit your updates, your complete update once you've completed it to the EPA for their feedback, not just on the tribal objectives, but any possible EPA goals and objectives you've incorporated into your plan as well. And if they have feedback and changes, then you can just make those tweaks after they give that feedback to you. But in the meantime, you can continue to use that as a strategic planning and management tool for yourself. You also want to do an annual review of the departmental strategic plan. We're going to cover developing a strategic plan in Module 5 coming up. But you that takes time and resources, and you do want to do that on an annual basis. So annually reviewing and revising the department's strategic plan, including its mission, vision, values, goals, program areas, SWOT analysis, obtaining input from relevant departments, tribal council, and other stakeholders. You may choose to also get feedback from the EPA on that, possibly. This would be something you'd actually include just once under the general program area, because um, this is kind of your overarching. This is just one document. It's not specific. You will cover specific stuff, but it's more of a general document. Okay, so for these common ongoing recurring activities, you want to add them for every year under, for the most part, under every year and under every program area unless indicated otherwise. So you want to place program specific efforts, for example, your air resources or water resources related activities under that program. So because they will likely involve different funding sources, staff, activities, etc. So your air resources related education outreach needs to be under your air resources. You need to have at least one objective related to education outreach under air if you are doing those activities for every year. And same thing for water. Those are probably funded under 106 or 319. So you want to have, and those are probably done by different staff, but you want to have separate water resources education outreach, a separate water resources education outreach objective under your water resources program for every single year. So an example of this to include both of these is just really the example that I just gave. So 2016 right here, this is your air resources education outreach. And in the plan for 2016, you'll also have an education outreach related objective focused on water resources, which is going to be under the water resources program area. So I mentioned the combined annual plans, and here's some sample language for including actually developing your combined annual plan. So for education outreach, you may have the objective to develop a combined annual plan for education outreach activities across all ETEP program areas that includes projected staffing, timing, costs, area of focus, interdepartmental events and collaboration opportunities, and other considerations. So notice this says across all ETEP priority program areas. So you're just listing this objective once, and you're listing it under the education outreach program area. So you have the separate specific education outreach related activities objectives for each area, and then you have the developing the combined annual plan, which you'll develop that will include all areas in one document. You list this objective just once under your education outreach program area, and you list it for 2016, 17, 18, 19, and then 20 if you have a 5-year plan. Training, very similar activity. Develop a combined annual training plan for all ETEP objectives that includes staffing, timing, etc. This you'd want to include under your general program area, so you'd have it listed for each year under your general program area. And the specific training objectives, so to pursue and attend those trainings, will actually be included separately under each program area for each year. What we're talking about here is just developing the plan. What we were talking about before was actually doing that particular activity or that objective. And then for funding, developing a combined annual plan for all of the following years ETEP objectives. So, as I mentioned, if you're looking at the following year, so in 2016, you'll be developing an annual funding plan to pursue various funding sources for all the 2017 objectives. So that's the next year. So you want to go and look at those, and this plan is going to have all of the different funding related activities, funding sources you're going to go after in one document just so you can better manage that. And then you also include that under your general program area. Oops. Okay, so I don't have these bulleted out, or don't have these faded. I don't have the graphics set up for this. But you're going to review by program area. You're going to review by program area by year at minimum. So you want to consider the available resources to complete the objective. Okay, so this is the process of actually reviewing and organizing your objectives. So once you have all your objectives in your ETEP strategic work plan, You want to review those. You want to consider review these by program. So at minimum, you want to review them by program area by year. So let's pull this back up and I'll show you what that means. Nope, this is not it. All right, so in this case, we're pulling up the ETEP strategic work plan, and then to do this by area by year, actually, you'd start by area. So in this case, let's see, let's filter out everything else, and let's just do climate change. Let's unfilter these. So we do all of our activities. And then by year just means that you want to have your years in order. So you want to go through these activities for climate change and consider whether they make sense to do this year. So in your reviewing and updating your ETEP strategic work plan for climate change, you definitely want to do. Conducting a climate change vulnerability and risk assessment and preparing a report may be something you want to do. It depends whether you have funding to do it this year. If it turns out that you pursued funding to do this, but you didn't get it, but you're pursuing funding to do it next year, then change it to 2017. Doing education outreach activities, you want to keep that. Pursuing funding, training, collaboration, reporting, those are all activities that you want to include, you want to remain. So, and then in 2017, let's actually get these guys to sort, smallest to largest. So this is a very simple, climate change is more limited. I mean, other ones will have a lot more incorporated in them. So in 2017, you have listed develop a climate change adaptation and preparedness plan. So that may be something where, since you didn't actually get funding to do the mitigation and risk assessment, which is the precursor to the plan, you may choose to then bump that to 2018. And then, the other activities, reporting and other stuff will probably be the same. Developing a mitigation plan, you may choose to leave in 2018. Beginning to do adaptation, preparedness, and pilot implementation. That may be something that because you didn't develop the plan in 2017, you may move that to 2019. In some cases, you may say, okay, you know what? It really doesn't make sense for us to do climate change mitigation. Like, we've already decided that the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Like, mitigation at this point, focusing on reducing greenhouse gas emissions isn't really going to help us. We're going to put all our eggs in the mitigation or in the adaptation basket. So let's change this to possible. Like, we don't want to eliminate it entirely, but we're not going to pursue that. We're not going to say we want to definitely pursue that. Or you could decide, we're definitely not going to pursue that, and you just delete it. So that's how you'd evaluate the objectives by program area, by year. Another way is to review your review by position by year, and that's more advanced. In this case, with that, you would actually look at the program area for a given year at one time and ask yourself, is this too much or too little work for this position? And it's particularly helpful if you actually have the work years for each staff member. You need to, this only works if you actually have the staff member information inserted in your plan, which isn't actually a requirement. So in this case, let's go back, let's unfilter this document. Let's clear all filters. Let's go here, and let's just focus on the air quality specialist. And then let's go and let's just, we're already organized by year, just to make sure, smallest by largest. And let's look at all these and just think, okay, in this case, like, you may be able to see the estimated work years. This is particularly helpful if you have this as well, because you can actually calculate them and see whether there's too much or too little work. But so in 2016, your air quality specialist is supposed to conduct an indoor air quality assessment and produce a report, do the ongoing outdoor air quality monitoring, do air quality data review, analysis, and submit that to the tribe. They're going to work on drafting and adopting an air quality ordinance that addresses air quality issues on the reservation. They're going to evaluate current TAS authorities under the Clean Air Act and investigate the need for additional authorities, and then pursue as directed. They're going to annually review and update the ETEP strategic work plan. They're going to do education outreach, and they're going to pursue funding for next year's climate change related activities. They're going to do climate change training. They're going to do collaboration. So this is all the activities that the air quality specialist is involved in. These things aren't exclusive to the air quality specialist, so you got to consider to what extent these things are going to be done by somebody else, but you got to decide, is this too much or too much for our air quality specialists? And you may decide, you know what, this is too much. We're going to move developing the air ordinance to 2017. We didn't get funding for it anyways. We just, we need to change that activity, move that forward. So it's just an example. And then if you did actually insert the work years and stuff like that, you might want to adjust those as well. I'll cover more about managing staffing and work years in module number 7. Okay, so I did go into a lot of detail on these things. I'll do a few more minutes of this. I know it was only going to be an hour long, but I just wanted to show you really quickly how you can add some common objectives into these very quickly. So let me go right here, and then let's go right here. Let's just say we want to add this common objective of, let's go back through our work through example I've been working on throughout this course. So we want to add the objective of doing air resources related education outreach. So let's go in here, let's paste this objective in here, develop, test, and evaluate, and deliver education outreach literature, materials, and activities on air resources issues and opportunities related to annual objectives. See annual, combined annual education outreach plan. So we know this is a year in, year out activity. We're going to put 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. So we know we're going to do this every single year. All these things are pretty much going to be the same. So this is going to be a tribal activity. It's in the program area of air. And then we're going to put in the category of educating. And then the first one's not a repeat activity, but the second one will be a repeat activity. So this is the bare bones essential information that's required. So at this point, we're just going to copy and paste it. So right there, we just got, let's put the right year here. Right there, we just got all of our education outreach under the Air Resources Program taken care of in our ETEP very quickly. And you're going to do the same stuff for water, so you can very easily just do the same thing for water. So let's just copy and paste these first two. Shoot. Let's copy and paste the years. And then let's copy and paste this guy right here. We're going to change just this one. So we're just quickly going to change air resources to water resources. Same thing. I mean, you could copy and paste it all, but in this cat box right here, instead of air, you're going to put water. It's still educating. It's not repeat for the first one, but it will be for the second and thirds. This is just kind of a filtering option that I've talked a little bit about before. And then you copy and paste. So you've just done your education outreach for water. In this example plan, we only have 5 different areas. So we have air, education outreach, general, waste, and water. So we didn't cover water because that's very specific. General doesn't really have an education outreach component to it. And the education outreach stuff there's not going to be a general conduct education outreach focused on education outreach, because that wouldn't make sense. One thing you will see under education outreach is going to be developing the annual plan if that's what you're going to do. So you'd repeat the same thing for waste. Another thing you do is you go back in here, and let's pull this up to get this language as well. Develop a combined annual education outreach plan. Let's put that in here. 2016. I'll just copy and paste these guys. That's probably would have been faster just to type it. Definitely would have been faster just to type it. So this is tribe. This is going to be education outreach is the area because it's developing that plan. It's not repeat for the first year, but it is repeat for the second and third year. And then we're just going to grab these guys. And we're going to copy, and paste. Okay, so copy and paste one more. So that's how you quickly cut and paste these common objectives into your ETEP strategic work plan. So obviously there's some samples within this presentation that you'll get, but you can also find samples in the catalog that I provided. And with the catalog, you'll need to probably download it and as an Excel file in order to get this. But as I mentioned, this catalog I think has 1,700 different example language objectives that you can do. You can grab sample language and copy and paste it in here. It has the capacity indicator numbers associated with each one. So one thing I didn't include in here that you'll want to is capacity indicator numbers. And I do have sample ones of those as well. So, you can just copy and paste them. You can just knock out those simple common activities very easily and very quickly to populate your plan. And then really the rest of it is just filling it in with changing activities. So you have, your ongoing water monitoring, your ongoing air resources monitoring. You're doing the same thing. You're cutting and pasting those activities. You just want to make sure you have them on your radar. You want to make sure you're allocating sufficient funding, time and staffing to each particular objective you're accounting for on a given year. That's the only way it'll be effective as a strategic work plan. Okay, so let's come back here. All right, so I don't have time to walk through some of the other information gathering stuff. This is stuff I've already done before. I was just going to do more of it if I had more time. I was going to do kind of more demonstration of adding goals and objectives. So actually, just real quick, I'll just show you how you could, go to the catalog. You could identify, okay, let's try to find some waste management related objectives here. And in this case, we can just review these, this particular part, they're taken from the GAP guidance. So let's say one of your objectives is you want to develop a tribally approved integrated waste management plan. So in this case, you can just copy this objective here. You can go to your plan. You can paste this right here. You got to paste it at the appropriate spot. Okay, so now you have the objective pasted in here, and then you can decide, okay, well, what year am I going to do this in? Let's say we pursued funding to do this in fiscal year 2017. Let's put that there. We'll put tribe. In this case, let's put planning as the category. And now you have this particular objective in your plan. I'm a formatting stickler, so I want it to look the same, be the same size. I also don't like there to be a period. So, instead of develop, it might be update. So you may already have one, update, or, update your tribally, update a tribally approved integrated waste management plan. So that's, a very quick way to populate your ETEP strategic work plan with new objectives. Okay, any questions on that? So let's scroll down here. All right, so the next steps are really the same as last time. I'm going to do doodle poll for module number 5. I'll release that within the next day or so. I'm doing these a little more quickly than I was doing the first several. I'll probably try to get this. I'll offer to do it even this week. I'll focus just on next week. So I want to find out what your availability is to do the module next week. They'll focus on strategic planning. The assignments are really the same as they were for following Module 3. You want to continue to work on those things. What we went through today just kind of gives you more information, more tools, more skills to be able to populate your ETEP strategic work plan. And an email of the assignments and materials will be sent out soon. So thank you very much. Please do complete the evaluation that's going to pop up in one moment when I end this. And I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you all in Module 5.